Hello, everyone, and welcome into episode 90 of the Stomp the Bus Show. I am your host, Mark Harris, and we've got a great show for you. Colton's laptop camera isn't working, so we won't be able to see him, but we'll be able to hear him. Colton, how's it going, man?
Good, man. You know the magic's in my voice, not so much in my appearance. So it's all good. Those Apple computers, man, you get about a 5, 6 year shelf life. I'm coming up on that, so um, gotta find a way to get a new one of those. They're not cheap, but yeah, good to be back anyway. Let's get into it.
Yeah, man. This is episode 90 of the Stomp the Bus Show. We are part of the College Huddle podcast network. You can follow the College Huddle at the College Huddle on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, anywhere. I don't know if they have an Instagram page, but definitely on thecollegehuddle.com and at College Huddle on Twitter. So yeah, I'm actually going to go on a West Virginia podcast on Monday. Even though ASU doesn't play, they invited me, so that'll be fun. But we got to talk about solely ASU first here. And the biggest kind of theme of fall camp so far, unsurprisingly, is the quarterback battle between Sam Leavitt and Jeff Sims. And I think the interesting part of it is that it's much more of a battle than I thought it was going to be. That's kind of the way I'm thinking about it. And it's not that I'm upset that Sam Leavitt hasn't really pulled away because it's only been like a week and a half of practice or anything like that. I just think it's interesting how Sims is keeping this pretty close.
Yeah, I think this for me, just hearing this and kind of listening to what Dillingham had to say about it and everything like that. I know you have it on the show sheet, but he referred to both as, potential NFL guys. And you try to weed through that and you try to identify what element of that is like a coach just supporting his guys. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I recognize that Jeff Sims is a tenured college quarterback, right? He's been around, didn't have a great season last year at Nebraska, but he's got that game experience. He's got experience, playing at this level. Levitt has a year under his belt, right, at Michigan State. So, uh,
Oh,
hear me?
yep. Okay, we're back now.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. You get the tenure with Jeff Sims. So I think just that familiarity, right? And Dillingham has sort of been known as a guy who makes life easier on his quarterbacks. Um, I think you couple that with Sims having done all of this before, you're going to get positive results in the early going, right? I think any sort of test, and that's probably why we're seeing this competition be a little closer than maybe we thought it would be. Is it I don't know. Is it a little worrisome that Levitt hasn't completely pulled away? I guess you could argue yes, but I'm also looking at this as like, okay, if they're both showing promise and if Dillingham, somebody who has coached guys who went on to play on Sundays, right? If this guy sees that these are possible NFL guys and feels like they're talented, then it seems like he can make this system work with both of them, which really benefits the depth argument, right? And we saw how dire that can get very quickly last season. So, I mean, worst case scenario, you have a guy who really pushed to start as your backup, which is not a bad spot to be in at all. I don't really see this as much of a negative. Worst case, Jeff Sims is better than we thought he was going to be. Or Levitt takes that job and runs with it once they're playing meaningful games and meaningful snaps. So we'll just see how that goes. But at the end of the day, you get depth, and I think depth is what's most important in year two under Dillingham.
Absolutely. And for me, the thing that stands out about this, competition, is more so that Sims. I'm just much more surprised that Sims is making this close. I think Sims is really the story in all this, right? I think with
Right.
Leavitt, again, we're not at practice, but it seems like from the people who are covering it that it's not like Leavitt is like playing really bad or whatever. It's more
Mm-hmm.
that just he's kind of just progressing as normal, and then Sims is just turning heads because Sims is, I mean, he's athletic, man. I'm looking through his I'm looking through his stats. He only ran for 189 yards at Nebraska last year, but some of that was just because he just didn't get that much opportunity because he played badly. One touchdown pass and 6 picks isn't going to do it. But every year at Georgia, so first year at Georgia Tech ran for 492 yards, 6 touchdowns. The next year, 372 yards, 4 touchdowns. 2022, only 300 yards, 1 touchdown. So that is just going to be something that will I mean, football is a game of athleticism. So obviously, like him having that extra rushing element is going to be crucial. And it does to me with Dillingham's kind of quarterback experience. Like I'm okay if I'm just more okay than I was earlier in this process of Sims being the starter. I think most ASU fans would rather it just be like Sam Leavitt pulls away and he kind of enters this year as the quarterback for ASU. But I mean, he hasn't really proven it, right? He hasn't. He's played 4 games last year for Michigan State, so he's not a proven commodity at all. Jeff Sims kind of is, but it's just like, are we getting the Jeff Sims who was decent at Georgia Tech, or are we getting the Jeff Sims who was a disaster at Nebraska, right? Like, that's what this comes down to. Because, like, we can say, oh, Jeff Sims is athletic, is, one of the more athletic quarterbacks out there, but if he turns the ball over at the rate that he did, particularly in Nebraska, and also, I mean, it's not like he was super clean with it at Georgia Tech, then, all of this is a moot point. But it is good to have the depth, like you mentioned. And I don't know. I guess to just wrap up this first little thought is like, Jeff Sims is definitely he's impressing me, just based on what we've seen from practice and stuff. Like he's been way more impressive than I anticipated, and for Dillingham to say, I know that him calling both those quarterbacks Sunday, or what do you say? We have NFL caliber quarterbacks on this roster. I know him saying that I don't know what to make of that, honestly. Like, does he actually think they're both going to be in the NFL? Does he think that, is he just saying it for confidence? Because I feel like if you were just saying it for confidence reasons, then there's a much vaguer way to go about it, So that's a pretty pointed comment.
Yeah. And again, maybe, how much of that is, yeah, they look good, right? They're NFL caliber, like they could get, I don't think, like they could get there, that sort of thing, which bodes well for us, I guess. But, yeah, I think the Jeff Sims thing, it's interesting, right? Because he's kind of had a roller coaster of a career to this point. He's been in different systems, that sort of thing. Dillingham, again, I mentioned this earlier, but his reputation is as a very quarterback-friendly offensive mind. So maybe it could be as simple as Dillingham finding a way to unlock Jeff Sims' skill set, and we're seeing a version of him that we haven't necessarily seen yet, and that's kind of what's translated to practice into this competition with Leavitt. Who knows? In that case, I think ASU is getting a really solid quarterback. I also think that, from my perspective, the decision that Dillingham makes is one that he made based on what he has seen, right? And what he thinks he can, the skill set that he thinks he can win with. So if he does end up going with Jeff Sims, I think it would be unexpected in terms of like we always kind of thought Leavitt was going to take this job and run with it. But
It would
if
be really
Sims is
unexpected. Yeah.
right, if Sims is the one that he goes with, then Sims effectively unseated Leavitt, right? Because that's kind of what it
Yeah.
seemed like it would be, which means we have a pretty talented quarterback, or at least one talented enough to win a job on our hands. Which I don't know. That's good, however you shape it or however you slice it up, right? So I'll take that. And then you still get the depth factor, right? Maybe I know it all depends on what we see when we get onto the field, and what we've seen on the field is a pretty mixed bag from Jeff Sims. But you haven't seen too much from Leavitt either, so it's all about that sample size, and I guess we'll kind of see what happens when Dillingham makes that decision.
Yeah, for sure. And I am. Let me pull up some of Jeff Sims' stats from when he was at Georgia Tech, because I think the reason why ASU fans, college football fans, whatever, like, don't have a high opinion of Jeff Smith is obvious, or Jeff Sims, not Smith, is because of how bad he was at Nebraska. But if you would ask people about Jeff Sims at this time last year, right? If you were asking someone on August 9th, 2023, almost said 2022, about Jeff Sims, they'd be like, oh, he was, that pretty good quarterback at Georgia Tech, good runner, maybe he can do better things at Nebraska. So the question is, like, are we getting the bad Jeff Sims from Nebraska, or would ASU potentially get the decent Jeff Sims who was at Georgia Tech? I'm going to pull up his game log. Yes, share screen. I'm going to pull up his game log from 2022 at Georgia Tech. So he played in 7 games. So that's not, I don't know what it was, whether it was injury or something else. 5 touchdowns, 3 picks, not super impressive, but then 300 rushing yards and a touchdown. The thing with him is the running game is such a big portion of his game. You just see 41 yards, 48. It shows that he is consistent. Like, that's a consistent part of the offense. And it's also tough to, I don't know. Georgia Tech was not in a good spot these years. I mean, they lose 42-0 to Ole Miss, get killed by Clemson, killed by UCF. So, like, I don't know. It's kind of hard to judge these, but he played well against Duke, played decently well against Pitt. So he's clearly, like, he's not an irredeemable player, Let's look at his freshman year in 2020. This is when he played Kenny Dillingham, right? See this? I don't know if you can see the screen, Colton, but
yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, they beat. I mean, this game right here, almost 4 years ago, is probably a big reason why Jeff Sims is here. If you really look at it, like, because Dillingham was at Florida State at this point in time. They beat Florida State. He throws, 227 yards. That's pretty good for, like, a freshman quarterback. 64 yards rushing, 6 rushing touchdowns. Like, I think Dillingham sees the freshman year quarterback Jeff Sims in they lost 73-7 to Clemson that year. My goodness. So he clearly has something to offer. I think that's the best way to wrap up this Jeff Sims discussion.
Did you look at his Nebraska numbers? Do you have those?
Well, I do have them. He threw for, I'm not going to share them on screen since I just got out of that, but he had 282 passing yards, 1 touchdown, and 6 interceptions in 5 games. And he only played in 3 games. So he threw 6 interceptions in 3 games. No. And the Nebraska offense never scored more than 14 points. And it was 2 13-10 losses. So that's a pretty bad, like, you're actively losing your team the game at that point, like
Right.
there's no way. Like, he was bad last year. So that's why it makes sense for the whole ASU community to be like, oh, okay, like we're bringing in Jeff Sims, like he's going to be the backup. And that very well could still be the case, right? Like earlier this week, this is from Chris Cartman. This is on August 5th. So Dillingham said Leavitt responded to working with the second offense by having his best day. Firmly believes that they're both Sunday guys who can play in the NFL. Both had a good practice. So it's not like Sam Leavitt is wilting under the pressure, it seems. Apparently on Thursday up at Camp Tontozona, it was more of a not as good of a practice day. So the Saturday Camp Tontozona scrimmage might go a long way in them actually deciding a starter. We'll see.
Right.
The one thing that this I still think that Leavitt will end up being the starter. It just kind of I listened to a podcast with Hode Rubino of Devil's Digest on a Texas Tech show this morning because I saw it on the Devil's Digest feed, and Hode predicted that Sam Leavitt would win the job. So like from people in the know, it seems like Leavitt is ahead, but it's not so much ahead that he can just F up all the time and expect to, keep his starting job. And you also have to consider that Marcus Arroyo like brought Sam Leavitt in, basically to be the quarterback. So we can't forget about that aspect of it either. But
right. I think one of the big things here too is regardless of who wins the job, this isn't a system that you wouldn't be able to run with either guy, right?
Correct.
Like I think Leavitt is athletic enough to do what Jeff Sims can do, from a mobile perspective and running the ball and, rolling out and things like that. Mm-hmm. So regardless of who wins his job, I think you're going to see a very similar system either way. You're not going to see concepts, and that bodes well for, any sort of transition that would happen with injury or poor play or whatever it may be. Dillingham, I think we saw a lot last year, especially as we got into the Conyers games and things like that. Dillingham really having to crunch his playbook and limit what he was able to do in certain situations. I think you don't
want to watch the swinging gate again? You're done with the swinging gate?
Not necessarily. Yeah, I'd rather see quarterbacks play quarterback,
Bold.
So you've got two guys here, whoever's the starter and whoever's the backup. You've got two guys who can run an offense for Dillingham, which really opens up what he's going to try to do. And I think that bodes well in terms of longevity and in terms of, weathering any sort of storm that this team might run into. You hope that we are in the trending towards some some progression to the mean, so to speak, in terms of injury luck, because they were extremely unlucky last year, right? So you're hoping that they're due for some luck on that front, and you don't really have to deal with it. And speaking for the quarterback position, some luck on that front might only be, losing one quarterback instead of three. So who knows what happens, but you've got two guys here who could run a system. So they're already in better shape than I think they were last year when, you go from Rashada to now you're going with Drew Pine, who can only do certain things, and then Trenton Bourguet, who's limited in other places. And, you had a bunch of different styles at quarterback, guys who could play this style or this style. I think with these guys and, even Bourguet, who's a little more mobile and can roll out and things like that, you've got some consistency in the way that these quarterbacks play, which I think is the main takeaway for me, not necessarily like who's going to start. I kind of trust the coaches to make that decision. And I do think it'll end up being Leavitt. That kind of seems to be where it was trending all along. But to know that Jeff Sims at least made this close should inspire hope in what they have in the second unit, which could mean a lot to ASU.
Oh, for sure. And one thing that kind of popped up as you were talking about the quarterback injuries from last year, all the top three quarterbacks on the team last year Pine and Bourguet are just like small, like for college,
Right.
for at whatever Power 4 college football standards, they're small. Rashada isn't necessarily because he has the height, but he was so thin last year, and
Mm-hmm.
he had a pre-existing high school injury. So when you look at it from last year, it's like, oh, our top 3 quarterbacks were either small or thin, and you had an offensive line that got injured, and then your 4th quarterback just wasn't good, like just wasn't in Conover, even though he maybe had more of the size. But I think that's important because Sims is like, he is a fantastic athlete, and you can see like just by his body, like he's listed on ESPN 6'4", 220. So like and just seen some videos of him at practice. Like he is an athlete. And Leavitt is not like as built as Sims, but he's taller, and he's not as thin as Rashada was last year, right? And they're both. I mean, obviously Sims is a better runner than Leavitt, but Leavitt's a pretty dang good runner in his own right. So that's good. And then when you talk about the injuries, like it all stemmed from the offensive line last year, and I think one thing that's pretty clear entering this season is the offensive line. We don't know how good it's actually going to be, but it's much more set in place, right? Like this was before fall camp, but Dillingham mentioned that only 3 guys entering camp had locked in starting positions. One of those was center Leaf Fautanu. One of those, I think it's left guard Ben Coleman, and he was injured all of last year after transferring him from Cal. And then defensive tackle CJ Fight, which for a freshman or a sophomore to be locked in at DT entering the year is pretty incredible. Anyway, so you have 2 guys entering camp that are locked in, and then you have Sean Na'a, who played a lot last year who was as a promising freshman last year. He'll likely take over the other guard spot. Emmett Boley will likely be the starting right tackle, and apparently he's looked pretty good at camp, which makes sense. And so then it just comes down to left tackle, and you have a few guys competing for that. But it does feel like there's just more known quantities on the offensive line. And it's really like I look at that and I look at there's only one real problem position, or potential problem position, which is left tackle. And that's a bad position to have it at, but it's better than like 3 problem positions on the offensive line,
Definitely. Yeah. And O-line obviously was another massive issue last year on the injury front. So to be establishing starters and kind of figuring out what the depth looks like behind them, guys who can play multiple positions, things like that, where you might have to swing dudes should there be other injuries, I think is a super important piece of the whole puzzle. And deciding on starters is the first piece to that. So you kind of touched on the Camp T scrimmage being big for the quarterbacks. I think we'll start to see depth charts and other starters named in the pretty near future, because this season is coming up quick. We're almost there.
3 weeks.
So who's going to start against Wyoming should be answered relatively quickly, I would think.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is like it's not like they're playing some FCS team where it's like, oh, we can do
like work out the kinks
first half and then Sims for the second half, or how they sometimes like mix the series. Like Wyoming is too good of a team that ASU can't just be like, oh, like we've got this one in the bag. Like, no, the last time we played a Mountain West team, we got shut out. So like, it's not in the bag. There is no in the bags. Okay. And then kind of after, I kind of want to end this part of the conversation, but I mentioned on the last show, if you have 2 of the 3 guys with locked in starting roles on the interior offensive line in Fautanu and Coleman, and then if Na'a is the other guard, then all of a sudden, like, interior offensive line becomes maybe a strength is too overzealous of a way to describe it, but it is a solid part of your team, at least. And I mean, this is going to be a team that really focuses on running the ball, just with the talent in the running back room that they have, and having a solid interior offensive line is so critical. I mean, how many NFL teams fan bases complain about having bad interior offensive lines, right? Like it's a tough area to be decent at. And if ASU can be decent at it, like that's pretty big. Like it's a way bigger thing than people think about the trajectory of this team.
Yeah, and for most college offenses, you want to try to establish some sort of zone running scheme, right? And a lot of that is predicated on an interior offensive line who can run the zone and get to the second level and do things like that. If you're trying to establish, that east-west style of running, right? And you don't have an interior line that can set the tone. It's going to be tough to establish that style. So an interior line is extremely important. And if you've got the established guys there and can kind of build out, I think obviously tackles are going to play a massive role in doing what you want, throwing the ball too. But all of those guys kind of work together to establish that. So building on the offensive line from, the inside out is not a bad way to do it. And it looks like that's kind of what they're trending toward.
For sure. And yeah, it'll just help out all the other skill guys if it can work out like that, And I mean, speaking of, I'm impressed with what I've seen from the skill guys so far. Like Jordan Tyson just continues to just be awesome all the time. And it's not that surprising because we saw what he did at Colorado 2 years ago, but it's still good to see after not seeing him last year. The running backs, I mean, they legitimately might have six. Oop. Mute you real. They might legitimately have six good running backs that they can use in a game. Obviously, we know Scattaboo is awesome and Rayleigh Brown has talent. But when you have a guy like Kyson Brown performing really well at practice, he's probably the fifth best running back on this team. Alton McCaskill is someone that people forget about, and he ran like a 22-mile-per-hour tracking thing at ASU during the spring. And it's really, I mean, Iguano apparently just compared McCaskill to Rachaad White. Like if you're just casually throwing around the Rachaad White comparison, like that is, I mean, Rachaad White might be the best running back I've seen at ASU, and we've seen a lot of pretty good running backs in our time. So like, it's almost like it almost makes me worry less about the quarterback competition, because it's like if we can have games where we just focus on running the ball, you mix in some quarterback runs in there, and the passing game is a little more simple for fine with me, man. Like lean on your strengths, and they have just good running backs. Like and DeCarlos Brooks, didn't even mention DeCarlos Brooks. And then of course, Jason Brown, the 4-star coming in, who is one of the better running backs in the entire country. So it's just
100%. Yeah. They're back to having that deep stable. It seems like, of guys who, it's obviously Scattaboo's going to garner all the headlines, but you kind of hit on those three names, Brooks, Brown, and McCaskill, who can still, come in and make an impact. And if you have that depth, it takes a lot of pressure off of your quarterbacks. They don't have to go out and be world beaters, especially in the early going when you're trying to establish that. Establish, who your quarterback's going to be, the system you're going to run. If those running backs can take the pressure off, that could pay dividends for, whatever you're trying to do offensively while you establish whatever it is you're trying to do.
Establish the run. And one of those guys is going to get injured. Yeah. One of those guys is going to get injured this year, right? Like that's just how it goes. Brooks was injured last year. And, we saw the game with Brooks and Scattaboo both healthy against Washington State last year, and ASU torched him. and Brooks
Right.
had 3 touchdowns. So like that room like really makes me think like, man, like this.
It could be a special group for sure.
It really could be. And Dillingham is going to be able to use them in, out of the backfield too, right? Like there's no way he got all of these guys to come here without some assurances to a few of them being like, hey, like we might not hand you the ball as much as Scattaboo and I don't know, Brooks, and say we're the incumbents, but Rayleigh Brown, you're going to get some screen passes, and we know you can do great work with that. And
yeah. And I mean, they might even use him out of the backfield too. If we're talking about running back options, using Rayleigh Brown as a back, I think he projects more as like that third down receiving back, somebody you can use in the slot, that sort of thing. But I mean, there's no reason to think he won't get some, touches out of the backfield as a running back and things like that. The more weapons you have, same with Scatterbo, right?
Yeah.
The more weapons you have across the board, it's just going to continue to benefit the offense. So finding ways to use those guys, that's a good problem to have. If you have versatile skill sets and you have to figure out how to get guys involved outside of just their, standard positions, I think that's a real good problem to have, and it's going to make life tough on defensive coordinators.
Absolutely. Want to touch on 2 more offensive transfers. Both of these guys came in after spring ball before we shift over to basketball stuff. Malik McLean, who came in from Penn State, didn't really do much there. First thing I see from Camp T is him beating, I think it was LaTerrence Welsh on a post route, and just like easily, and then just immediately like hops over the fence right after. I'm like, okay, like this guy's going to be good. Happy to see that. And then the guy, Shimon Mateer, the tight end, who was at Colorado. He was at Colorado for like 10 days and then had transferred in from Cincinnati before that. So we didn't really know what to expect from him. This dude is a good athlete. He will really be used this year for sure. And I mean, you look at his stats, he had like 350 yards receiving and 5 touchdowns with Emory Jones as his quarterback. So those 2 guys, I feel like they really tie the rest of the offense together, and from what I've seen from the wide receivers, I am much less worried about losing Badger than I was entering fall camp, because there were a few people on ASU social media or whatever that were like, oh, losing Badger is not a big deal. And my thing is like, well, he was our best player last year, so it is a big deal. And I think it could still hurt them, I guess. But I'm less worried about it now after what I've seen. And with hopefully, Troy O'Meary continues to emerge as well.
Yeah, I mean, I had to pop a little soda there. When
cooling down after a rough week.
Yeah.
Get some Diet Mountain Dew.
Exactly. That's literally what I popped. Was a Diet Baja Blast.
Really? A
yeah.
Diet Baja Blast. Okay.
With Mountain Dew, but anyway.
Don't tell Jamie Vance.
When Badger decided to transfer, I wouldn't say I was in the camp that was like, oh, that's not a loss. It definitely is going to hurt them. He's obviously their best skill player, but I was also in the camp that this is a really deep group, and while they're not nearly as top heavy as they were with Badger, I still think they have guys in that room who can step up and produce and fill that void. So it's not going to break them. Losing Badger is not going to break them. But that's also contingent upon these guys stepping up and taking what they've done over the course of the offseason and showing that projects to actual games. So,
no, I think the way you phrase it as his absence is not going to break them is a good way to put it, because I think Badger probably hurts you in terms of like reaching your ceiling, like he could be the difference in, let's say ASU has a really good season and things just really click. he would be the difference in ASU going 9-3 versus going 8-4 type of deal. But I don't think he's the difference in them going 5-7 versus 6-6, you know? And as we saw last year, like top heaviness in football is extremely overrated. Extremely. Unless you're talking about a quarterback or like in a Hall of Fame caliber player or something like that. So,
Right. I mean, you can just roll a running back out at quarterback and win 3 games.
there you go.
That's always an option.
It can be done. So that'll wrap up our football stuff for this episode. Not really going to talk too much about the defense. I think I'm just not that worried about the defense heading into this year. They added talent as well. Brian Ward seemed incredibly confident in the linebackers, and he mentioned yesterday that like there's just a bunch of guys who have started a lot of games. You know, we have the guys who played last year coming back, and then you get Keyshawn Elliott from New Mexico State. The guy from Zaire, I think it's Zaire's Fiasa. So like you have dudes at that position. And I'm not like the secondary is just not a worry for me. You know, losing Ed Woods isn't great, Jordan Clark, but I feel like they've been able to replace those guys somewhat seamlessly. Again, it's early. They haven't played a game, all that. But I think the defense is really not – it's just not as much of a question mark, in my opinion, because you have the coordinator coming back and the defense like was kind of the story of their team last year, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And I think you hit the nail on the head with the coordinator coming back. You know, we can look at Xavier Alford and the front seven and all of these like guys and players, and ultimately they're the guys who have to execute. But maintaining that consistency over a year-to-year basis is very unheard of in the landscape of football in general, right? So getting Brian Ward back and getting another year of his scheme and the guys feeling more comfortable in that scheme and that sort of thing, I think is going to be huge. You can't really overstate how massive that'll be for the production of some of these guys. Again, they got to go out there and they got to execute. But when you don't have to think about your next step, you just have to, you know, you've done it so many times, you're comfortable. You have the reps, it makes everything feel so much more seamless.
100%. 100%. And I mean, like we talked about earlier this offseason, I think when people are just picking, ASU is just going to be bad, there was never a mention of the defense. Never, or very rarely there was, you know.
No, and I think a hot take might be that this defense finishes, I don't know, and I don't know how hot of a take this will be, but top half of the Big 12 isn't out of the question, if not higher. I think this defense has
it's a mild simmer of a take. I don't think most people would expect that, but it is definitely within the realm of possibility after what we saw last year.
Yeah, I think it's a talented group, and man, I can't overstate that consistency and the fact that you have the same coordinator. You're not learning a new scheme. You get to play the same scheme for a second year, which never happens, right? Guys are moving on constantly. So to get that, I think, is going to pay dividends. And you're also not going against, you know, high-flying offenses, right? The Big 12 style is a little different from what ASU faced in the Pac-12. And let's not forget, man, they shut down Michael Penix. Like they had great games.
Yes.
Like they had great games against great offenses in the Pac-12. They also had some Oregons and some Utahs in the mix, but that's not to say that this group doesn't have the potential to go out and shut down a Big 12 offense.
Well, I think some of that was just the depth was gone. I mean, it's not a coincidence that
they were depleted at that point and everything
but
too.
Their three worst defensive games all came in the month of November, and they all came to just programs who were just really humming at that point. You know, Utah, that game was so weird because you had Conover come in, and I think if you were we've all been in this position in sports where it's like, this important player does not have it, you know, and human nature sets in. And I think they just, I don't know. That's just my theory on that game. And then, Bo Nix is a first-round quarterback. Like Arizona was an
Right.
awesome team last year that was playing incredible football at the end of the year. Like as ASU fans, we should be very, very happy that the Arizona Wildcats. I mean, who knows? Maybe they'll be really good this year too, and like compete for a playoff spot. But like they could have been a 12-team playoff team last year.
Right.
But that's not what was
They
set
probably
up.
would have been.
They were playing great. Like they were playing great football. So anyway, and Brian Ward actually kind of brought up this point that you were making about, well, we played great offenses last year. I mean, they played 3 first-round quarterbacks, right? And
yeah, you got Williams, Penix, and Nix.
Yeah, and then there's like Fafita isn't going to be a first-round quarterback, but he's a good college quarterback, as we've seen. They've played the guy at Fresno State was pretty good, Mikey Keene, like Shador Sanders. They put,
Shador.
So who knows if he'll be a first round? He will be an NFL. So like you just go down the list and it's like, oh, okay, like we played some tough competition, and I think that's going to be such a source of confidence for the guys who were on the team last year. And it's not like you had Clayton Smith's coming back, Prince Dorba's back. A few of your linebackers are back. A few, some guys on the defensive line are back. Both likely your starting safeties will be back, and Shamari Simmons and Xavier Alford didn't play last year, but he played in practice, right? And he's just been recognized as one of the better players on the team. So there's a reason why I guess we're talking about it now, but like, I just think if you're an ASU fan who just like paid attention last year, you could see that the defense, Ward is just a good schematically, right? Like, like he had a really good defense at Washington State, and like they almost never have as good of personnel as ASU does. It's just doesn't happen on the defensive side that often. So I'm excited for them, and I think the defense is a real floor raiser for this team. I just do, and
that's a good way to describe it, a floor raiser. I think they will be in a lot of games, so it should be a better season than what people are projecting. But you can't fault the national Big 12 guys especially in the landscape of realignment and everything like that, for just kind of throwing the new team down at the bottom. I'm not saying ASU will be a top-tier Big 12 team, but the worst team in the Big 12 might be a bit of a stretch.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. But whatever. It's better to be picked from like a motivation standpoint if you're Dillingham or whatever. Like, it's better to be picked 16th than like 14th,
Right.
Because you can't be like, oh, well, at least – mentally, you can't be like, oh, well, at least we're better than Houston or whatever. They're like, oh, they think that we're the worst. Like, and
yeah,
again,
I'm sure you could just round down in that scenario.
Just not tell the players there are only 14 teams in the Big 12 as opposed to 16.
Right. Just lie about the number of teams, and you can do that because it's called the Big 12. Yeah. So anything after 12, it's realistic. There could be that many teams.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, I was going to try to do a segue here, but speaking of
even the best fall down sometimes.
Okay, how about this? Speaking of not knowing how many I'm not even going to try because ASU is playing.
Sometimes just punt, man. It's 4th and 15. There's no use going for it.
Not calling up 4 verts this time. Anyway, ASU basketball plans to face Gonzaga in this year's non-conference schedule. According to John Rothstein, they are beginning a home-and-home series this upcoming season, and ASU will play Gonzaga in Spokane it's sometime in early November. I got this tweet pulled up here. Bullocks. It's sometime it's early November. So ASU's non-conference now features Gonzaga, Santa Clara, Grand Canyon, and then they're scheduled to play the Florida Gators on December 14th in Atlanta. So we talked about consistency with the ASU defense earlier. Bobby Hurley is staying consistent by scheduling some hard opponents in the non-conference schedule.
Yeah, I mean, boost your resume. Every time we talked about the Big 12, we keep coming back to, you can go 21-10 or whatever it is and still make the tournament. You can have a worse record because you are playing better teams. But you have to beat some of these teams, right?
Yeah.
That's the key to it. You can't just get there by scheduling them. You actually have to win some of these games. So first year in a basketball super conference and you're scheduling some of the best non-conference opponents you can find. So, I mean, it's a bold strategy there, Mark. We'll see if it pays off for him.
Is that from a movie or something?
It is from a movie. What movie is it from?
Dodgeball, of course.
There you go. Did you just look it up?
I did not look it up.
I thought I saw you looking it up.
I think I know all the dodgeball quotes by the back of my hand now, Colton.
Good. Why'd you ask if it was from a movie? You just throw it out, man. I don't believe it.
Yeah, so I have a Rothstein tweet up on my phone right now. So this is Arizona State will play Santa Clara on November 8th, Gonzaga on November 10th, and this is in Spokane, and Grand Canyon on the 14th. That is that's a schedule right there. And then
GCU, shut the embassy down, man.
Yeah, no kidding. And then I mentioned the Florida game that is in mid-December in Atlanta. So that'll be a big game as well. And then I forgot to mention ASU is in the Acrisure Classic, which is in Palm Springs. November 28th, ASU will play New Mexico as well. So you've got Santa Clara, Gonzaga, GCU, all within a 6-day span in early November. And then you go back to Southern California for New Mexico at the end of the month. And then you play Florida mid-December. That's a schedule right there. And those are some interesting. And none of those.
It's a gauntlet. And I mean, dude, yeah. GCU was what, Sweet 16 last year? I can't remember. I know they won
almost. They came close.
One game. Okay, yeah. That's right. Did they play Bama to get there?
Yeah, they lost to Bama. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. But I mean, Bama was a Final Four team, and they even hung around with Bama for a little bit. I remember watching that game. So GCU's a tough program. I don't know. In years past, it was kind of like ASU looked at GCU like the little brother or whatever, but those roles have kind of flipped, man.
Yeah,
it's up to Bobby Hurley to make up that ground because he's lagging a little bit. GCU's winning tournament games.
Yeah, well, and the other thing, I'm just so glad ASU didn't play GCU last year because ASU was horrible last year. GCU was good.
Right.
At least this year, with ASU, it's okay, we don't know how good they're going to be, if they're going to be good at all, but at least you can go into the season being okay, I don't feel, hopeless against GCU like I would have last year, right? So
yeah,
that's big. And I mean, I think I'm glad it's been kind of on the schedule for a bit. So because it'll be played I think it's going to be played at the Suns Arena. It's kind of tough to keep track of where all these non-conference games are actually going to be played because half of them are on neutral sites. Anyway.
Is Mississippi State, are they on that schedule, or was that just the Barstool?
I think that was just last year.
Okay.
Yeah,
I couldn't remember.
Yeah, I didn't. Again, there isn't an official schedule announced, so it's kind of hard to find all the games. But I'm almost certain they don't play Mississippi State. So it'll be interesting for sure, and it does give them a lot of wiggle room in terms of what their final record needs to be.
Yeah. Their strength of schedule is going to be – it's got to be one of the strongest, right? It's got to be.
I mean, yeah, I haven't looked, but well, because you can't. It's not finalized, so there's no way to look. But
No, 100%. But when it's all said and done, that'll probably end up being one of the highest, right?
absolutely. I mean, I don't see how it couldn't be, honestly. And
Yeah, at least top 20.
yeah, for sure. And you wonder, like, we talk about, oh, like ASU may need to win, 17 games to get into the tournament with this non-conference schedule. I'm sort of thinking, like, what if ASU wins 20 games? What if they go 20-11? Is that going to be good enough for like a 6 seed or something? Because it's one thing for ASU to make the tournament, like the ways they have in recent years where they're, a play-in team basically, or even the 2020 season, they would have been like a 10 seed. It's
Right.
one thing to make it that way. It's another to make the tournament and like, oh, ASU's a 5 seed. Like, that's kind of wishful thinking, but you get my point. Like, it's if they do, play a bit better than we think they will, and Joson Sinone and Jane Quaintance and some transfer that we're not mentioning right now play well, then really high potential for this team because they're just going to be given so much wiggle room with the Big 12 schedule. Every big win that they have will help them so much, and there are just much fewer bad losses potentially on the schedule. So,
yeah, I do have to take off, so this will be my last thought. But I will say, I think that win number can be way smaller. It all just depends on who they beat. So that will be my parting words of wisdom. I'm sure those were groundbreaking. So
of course they were. Goes without saying. I'll remove you real quick just so if sometimes you've left calls in the past and it turns off. So
okay, yeah, just take me out. Good stuff. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
For sure. Thanks for hopping on. See you later, man. All right. Good stuff. One more thing to talk about, and this could be the most important development of anything we talked about on this show when it comes to ASU athletics. And I will share my screen again. Yeah, I know it works better. Here we go. So this is from Joe Tipton of On3. 5-star Koa Pete, a top 5 prospect in the 2025 class, has scheduled official visits to Arizona, Baylor, ASU, Duke, and Arkansas. Of these 5 programs, one of these stands out a little differently than the others. Obviously, Duke is the bluest of all blue bloods. Baylor recently won a natty and is a power. Arkansas has a natty in its somewhat recent past and just hired John Calipari, so they are a de facto power at this point. U of A, obviously, national championship and a power. 4 powers and ASU. I will say this. The fact that ASU is still in this mix for a guy who is a really high prospect in the upcoming collegiate class. I'm just impressed with Hurley and the coaching staff that they've been able to stay on him. And I get that I believe he's from Tempe. So sure, like theoretically he would have an inside edge to go to ASU, but that's not how it always works, as we know. So really, like if they can land Koa Pete, that would just, I'm not going to say program changing or anything like that because it's 1 year, you don't know how it's actually going to play out, all this. But it would be big. It would be big, and I think it would be a huge feather in the cap for Hurley, and I think it would really just continue just this positive momentum that ASU is on. So I'm really excited about that. Obviously, there's 4 other schools that are jockeying for his attention as well. So it's not like ASU, is some way better option than the other 4 because that's not true. But it's good to be in the mix. And especially when you've already added blue chip talent in the recent recruiting class, it's not some far-fetched idea that he could actually end up at ASU. So let's hope that works out for the Sun Devil men's basketball program. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe on our YouTube page. Rate and review on your podcast platform of choice. Follow the College Huddle podcast network. So many great shows. If I'm being honest, we're probably on the lower end of some of these shows. Like they do a really good job. And all of the content creators out there are very passionate about their school, just like we are. So give them some attention. And that'll wrap this show up. Again, please like and subscribe, rate and review. And as always, whoop, go Devils.